Quite a long title. Allen Darwin, Atkin Brothers, Martin, Hall and Co. Three fabulous Sheffield makers. So the reason I put this talk together is that I've seen these, I've seen the objects that these three companies made, and I think they're beautiful and they deserve to be celebrated, really. And one of the features that I've realised about museums is they tend to organise things by function or by age. And it actually means that despite the fact we had a lot of fabulous cutlery makers in the city, if you went anywhere to think, I want to go and see a collection by any of those cutlery makers, it's quite difficult. You might find one or two items scattered around. Many of the items will be in permanent storage, and obviously they're not so accessible. So this is partly an attempt to address that, but also just to celebrate three makers that you probably may not have heard of, but actually deserve to be celebrated. So these are the catalogues of the three companies, actually. And in a way, the covers of the catalogues, they look a bit boring. You know, if you went into a library and one of these was lying there, you probably wouldn't grab it. But in a sense, within them, there is a really nice story. And what is quite nice and is possible to do in the city in various different ways is sometimes to take an object and then to find it in the catalogue. The only thing that's slightly, well, two things are a bit sort of depressing. One is you often find you can't always find them in the catalogue. And secondly, you'll get the thing and you'll look at the catalogue, but you'll realise there's an awful lot more things in the catalogue than you've actually got in your possession. So I'm going to go through each of the three companies, particularly wanting to show off the wares that they actually made, but as you take the lid off these companies and get a bit of a background, you find some of the things that are really quite interesting. So Allen and Darwin, not surprisingly, founded by Charles James Allen, but he was from Islington and the son of a labourer. And his first job was as a clicker in the boot trade. Now, I had no idea what a clicker in the boot trade was. A clicker in the boot trade was somebody who basically cut out the shape of the leather from a hide. Okay, and it is interesting, I suppose, it gives us a slight insight that there were maybe labourers and craftspeople coming to Sheffield from other parts of the country, because Sheffield was this magnet for the, I'm going to use the word the cutlery industry, although it's obviously knives, flatware and hollowware, but you know, for that metalworking industry. On the other hand, the other half of Allen and Darwin, Sidney Darwin, he was the Sheffield son of a draper, and he was the grandson of John Darwin, who owned Elsica Ironworks. And that, you know, owning an ironworks suggests there was some money in that family. And John Darwin actually had interests in a number of areas around South Yorkshire, but he did also go bankrupt. So it wasn't a total success. Also, this notion about the interconnection of Sheffield cutlery companies. People went and worked for somebody, maybe picked up some knowledge, maybe picked up some skill, and thought, hey up, I can go and move somewhere else, either get more money, or I can go somewhere else, and I can actually set myself up and do it better. So he'd been apprenticed to Walker and Hall, another famous Sheffield company that we've done a talk on in the past. He had a managerial post at James Deakin and Son, which were another substantial Sheffield company, and also Lee and Wigfall, who actually made really nice objects, and a London silver firm. And they registered a silver mark in 1887 and 1892. Most of the objects you've got on display, and most of the objects we're talking about, are made, in fact, from silver plate. And silver plate, you didn't have to register. Often you will find the mark that was registered for silver is the same mark that companies used for silver-plated goods. Obviously, if it's silver, you can date things. The slight disadvantage of silver is it's quite bendy. So, in fact, if you're using it for cutlery, it's nowhere near as durable as something would have been from silver plate. Slightly shock horror, there's more than one Portland Works. Okay, and certainly we've got the notion there was at least three. Okay, at different times. So this company was based at the Portland Works, but 55 Arundel Street, with a London office in Hatton Gardens. What does Hatton Gardens say to you? Jewellery, quality, you know. So I suppose the thing we forget in our sort of parochial Sheffield, if you wanted to sell lots of goods, London was probably a significantly bigger market than Sheffield was. Okay, and so it did take quite a while in the 1840s, 1850s to go down to London. And some Sheffield cutlers were sort of sent with stuff to sell and say, don't come back until you've sold it. But obviously one solution there was to have a permanent office there. The partnership made silver and plated fruit knives. Some of this is back to Victorian etiquette. A couple of things the Victorians didn't like doing. One is they didn't like touching food that other people had touched. So they would go to extraordinary lengths to invent objects that meant you didn't have to come into sort of contact with somebody else. The other thing was, it wouldn't have been etiquette to stick your gnashes into an apple or a peach. What you would have done, you would have carved it with a dessert knife and fork. Okay? That's what they were making. Fish carvers, dessert knives, and cased goods. Cased goods essentially could have been anything from a canteen to a sort of fancy selection box. Sidney lived in Ravencliff in Ranmore, quite a nice residence, quite a big house, which at some point was actually passed on to another steelworking family. He was a Freemason and apparently liked a quiet life, and he's buried in Fulwood. He left £20,000. In 1928, the partnership between two of them was dissolved and they were restyled as just Allens. And it's interesting, Charles died in 1938. He left £48,000, which is quite a lot of money in 1938. And his son Lawrence took over the building and moved to the Portland Works on Randall Street. So one notion is, did they take the name with them? And what happened to the place at Arundel Street? And he died in 1961, leaving 75 grand, which was, again, a substantial amount of money in those days. So it's interesting, the Allen and Darwin catalogue, which is from 1910, which is, you could argue is that real peak period of making silver-plated goods. It only had 38 pages in it, in contrast with the Atkin Brothers, which we'll look at later. Their catalogue had 240 pages in it. So it wasn't a huge catalogue, but the thing about Allen and Darwin is, I think they concentrated on making a relatively small range of goods well. Now, for Allen and Darwin, this spoon and fork are really quite boring. Okay, most of Allen and Darwin's stuff is highly decorated. But the thing that grabbed my attention when I sort of delved into this catalogue, you had 7 different grades of silver plate. Okay? So you could have had full strength, strongly plated, well plated, lighter plated. So you have the AA grade down to the E grade. Sounds a bit like GCSE results, this, doesn't it? But what was interesting is, so just picking out one of the things on here, which was the large sugar tongs, which were being sold by the dozen, okay? If you wanted the best quality sugar tongs, they were 46 shillings. In today's price, 46 shillings would be £339 for 12 sugar tongs. So they were quite expensive items. But if you couldn't afford that, you could have gone for the cheaper end of the market, which was only 21 shillings and was £155. So basically, the ones at the bottom of that silver plating quality were actually half the price of the rest. Interesting, if you wanted to get something replated in Sheffield now, there is a company at the Portland Works that does it, and actually they will offer you 2 different grades of silver plating. But generally, I don't think many other companies offered that range of plating. The other thing they did, I mean, it mentions there Old English, which is a particular pattern. So this company had 8 patterns, okay? If you look at the spoons on the end table from the Atkin Brothers, you know, just in the spoon section, they had about at least 20 or 30 different patterns. And one of the queries we sometimes get at Hawley is people will send us a picture of something and say, can you identify this pattern? I was pleased the other day somebody got in touch from Australia and we were able to show her this is what the pattern actually was. Boxed carving sets. You know, what do you do when you've got a chicken or a joint in your house? You probably got the cutlery drawn. You'll probably get 2 implements out, okay? And so there was really quite a choice here. So you could have had a Moroccan case, you could have had an oak case, you could have had a walnut case, you could have had electroplated mounts, you could have had silver mounts, you could have had cheap ivory or best ivory. Do you think the elephants were labelled as that's a cheap elephant and that's a best elephant? But a 7-piece set with 4 rests, this is the one at the bottom, that was 169 shillings. Today's money, £1,247. you know, but generally that's the sort of range that we're sort of hitting there, which is really quite substantial. And I guess, you know, if you wanted a different configuration, you might have got there. Sometimes what you got is you got meat carvers and game carvers, separate things in the same box. Dessert knives. So these are the knives where you wouldn't eat, you know, pick the apple up and eat it. And the thing that sort of distinguishes them is the patterning. And I suppose it's an interesting question whether these were, generally these would have probably were acid etched or they were hand engraved. Some of them would have been stamped out. But one of the things is sometimes when you compare two of the products together, you realize they're not quite the same, which is sometimes an indicator that the things would have been done by hand. Interestingly here, if you wanted the ivory set, they would have cost you 140 shillings. If you wanted the mother of, this is on the right hand side, if you wanted the mother of pearl set, they were 150 shillings. So mother of pearl was more expensive than ivory. I had a chap in the museum this morning who'd had a pocket knife made in Sheffield with the mother of pearl handle, and actually the mother of pearl had to come from America. So it's something that there was a time when it was in good supply, but now it's much rarer and more difficult to find. You know, and again, fish knives and forks. So they had, in their catalogue, they had 33 different fish knives. And, you know, when you go to buy something and you've got a choice of 5 things, sometimes it can be a bit confusing, or you think, you struggle to make your mind up. So buying some cutlery would have been a major decision. If you were buying it from the catalogue, and again, I don't know if these companies were doing mail order or whether in fact they were just, you know, leaving a load of stock at a department store or somewhere else. But if you had the choice of 33, that would be quite a difficult choice. And we've got this whole range of handles. We've got ivory handles, we've got pearl handles, we've got xylonite handles. The top ones you could have had silver plated or you could have had silver. You know, down here, we've got that extra embellishment that the mother of pearl has actually been carved. And the people who did, you know, there were people, and that was their job, fluters. All they did was carve mother of pearl and turn it into elaborate patterns. But it's an extra stage in the production process, and consequently that was going to be a bit more money. And I think the pearl ones there, they've got quite a substantial price at the bottom. So this had 28 different sets of boxed fish carvers. Cake and melon, you know, that notion of carving a melon. I mean, it is awkward, isn't it, when you go to cut a melon? You know, when you're trying to get it sorted and you can end up seeds anywhere. But I guess if you were doing that at a Victorian table in front of everybody else, you would have wanted to make a proper job of it. And maybe to do a proper job of it, you need to have the proper tools to do it. One of the things that Allen and Darwin are typical of is really nice box sets with a couple of things in them. And there's a couple of sets at the back like that. They were probably for gifts. The nice thing is they were given for gifts. People put them away for best, and therefore they're still around in the world in best condition, still in the box, never used, and we can sort of celebrate them. Fruit spoons, you know, hark back to the golden age of afternoon tea when you had a trifle, or you had that fruit cocktail where you were all chasing the cherry, you know, but somebody had to put the spoons in there, and so you would have had serving spoons, possibly used for vegetables too. These sort of sets where, so we've got grape scissors in the middle there, 2 nutcrackers, a grape scissors, and 2 serving spoons. The extravagance of that, the grape scissors were simple. You can't cut anything else with a pair of grape scissors other than grapes. They've got an L-shaped profile. So all you were doing, you were going to the middle of the table, snipping off 4 or 5 grapes, moving them 2 foot to your plate, dropping them on your plate, grape scissors back, job done. So and I suppose the interesting thing is, was there only 1 pair of grape scissors on the table, or was there more than 1? But again, beautiful objects that we still find around in the place. And these variously different configured sets. The set at the bottom here, so the bit that joins the handle to the rest of the implement is known as a ferrule, and that's decorated. And then even posher, you'll get this bit at the end, which is called a finial, which also will be decorated. So, you know, the more decoration people could put in, the better. So for the last 10 years, I've been saying to people that these are oyster forks. And I think in a different catalogue, you would find these labelled as oyster forks. But in the Allen and Darwin catalogue, it's pretty clear they are down as butter forks. I haven't tried it yet with a piece of butter, you know, so there is something, but essentially these are gorgeous items. what is really interesting here is that this company were making essentially stone handles. Now, I'm not totally sure what this green material is. It's possibly called agate, okay? But it must have been possible to work it, to turn it into a sort of curved handle. But it's very distinctive, it's very different, and no other manufacturer seemed to make that. But again, you can see there, Butterfolks. I didn't mention, so I might as well mention it now. If you're a Sheffield cutlery company, one problem was, what was your logo going to be? And you might have a really good idea and then find, oh, sod it, somebody else has got it. Okay, because there were at least 1,500 different Sheffield cutlery companies. So the logo of Allen Darwin was an hourglass. Okay, and that was what they did. Crumbs and cabinets. I do love these objects, crumb trays. You might have come with somebody today who is a messy eater, in which case you need one of these. The other thing, they normally go with a brush, but the brushes always disappear. I don't know what happens to the brushes, whether they could be used. But the gorgeous objects, again, come with a lot of decoration, and you either needed a brush or you needed a butler with a pair of white gloves. The other thing was the scale of some of the cutlery sets. One of the things we sort of forget in Sheffield is the ancillary industries that went with the cutlery. And one of those was making boxes and cabinets. And it must have been a massive industry. And in fact, the last talk I gave was about a company called John Watts. And they made lots of wooden products, partly as a result of starting off making cabinets. So this cabinet, walnut cases, 5 drawers, 205 pieces, 392 shillings. Today's money, 2,819 pence. So next time you go to buy a set of cutlery and you see, look at the price and 100 or 200 quid, you think, that's a lot. Well, you know, the Victorians were looking at nearly 3 grand. And actually, that's the price without the contents. So on top of that, you had to buy the 209 pieces of cutlery that were going to go in there. Sorry, yeah, the 205 pieces that were going to go in there. The Atkin Brothers. So the Atkin Brothers didn't have a trademark as such, but what they did is they had the names essentially, or their initials. And there were 3 brothers, Henry, Edward, and Frank. And also they had a number of brands, which again, you know, just like there were hundreds of trademarks, well, there was also hundreds of brands. So if you wanted something original, it was a bit of a challenge. Now, True Rocks is a bit of a play on the word Truro, because where they did is they worked in the Truro Works. Why did they have somewhere in Cornwall in their title? Because one of their products was Britannia Metal, which had got tin in it. Just like James Dixon was in the Cornish Works. So you can see where some of that's come from. I don't know, look at the next one. Yeah, Neil Steen, lad. You know, basically saying, our knives are really good and they won't stain. And I've no idea what Nick is, you know, but maybe, well, actually it's Atkin spelled backwards. I hadn't quite clocked that before, but so, you know, a play on words, and they had to work quite hard, really. And the publicity claims they go back to 1750. The founder was somebody called Thomas Law, who was master cutler in 1753. They were succeeded by John, who registered a mark, which was a squat vase. And he was joined by the Atkins. So by 1828, he had a company called Law, Atkins and Oxley on Eyre Street. And, you know, again, that's that area around Arundel Street where lots of these companies were based. By 1829, it was Henry Atkin and John Oxley. By 1837, it was Broadhead and Atkin. And in 1841, Henry got fed up with that lot and he formed his own company. So interesting, that chopping and changing of people in different partnerships, working with different people. You know, either they fell out, people died, people moved on. Henry manufactured gold and silver dessert knives and forks, and with Oxley produced high quality pocket fruit knives. So we've talked about the dessert knives that were for eating an apple or a pear or some other piece of fruit. This is almost going back a bit further in time, where people would have carried a dessert knife with them, and very often they had this pattern of a mother of pearl handle that was beautifully carved. The blades were silver, because then the silver wouldn't react with the juices on the fruit, and also you have this wonderful back working on some of them. He died in 1853 and he was described as a man of superior intelligence and fine judgment. He's buried at Underbank Chapel, and his sons formed the Atkin Brothers. This chap, Simon Moore, is the greatest authority on pen and pocket knives. He's got a fabulous book, and actually we have got a collection of these sort of knives that are available in the main gallery. So the brothers expanded. In 1853, they registered their mark. They took over the factory of somebody else, Joseph Cutts, on Matilda Street. Their products, cutlery, silver and electroplated ware, Britannia ware and jewellery. Now, I wonder if the jewellery dropped off the end here at some point, because when you look in the catalogues, you don't see lots of their jewellery. The Sheffield Cutlery Company that was very famous for jewellery was Mappin and Webb, who basically ditched all the cutlery side of it and then just concentrated on the jewellery. But obviously there was a certain point there where they were making jewellery. In 1871, they employed 138 workers. 1881, 168, and by 1914, they're employing between 250 and 500 workers, which actually put them in the top 10 companies in the city. 1914 was really a bit of a cliff edge for the industries that made the silver plate. It was all downhill for the people that made fancy goods after the First World War for a whole variety of reasons. But you know, you could regard the peak as being that sort of period. Now, we talked about the Allen Darwin having a London office. Well, I think the Atkin brothers made a bigger play of having a London office, and you know, well, you know, their building, I don't know why, but their building was described as being a unique showroom. One of the things I think we struggle to get round is that notion of a Sheffield company having a showroom. And you know, it's probably a room that's 2 or 3 times the size of this, just stashed with things from wall to wall. And that's, you know, that's in a way one of the things that we can't create in the city anymore. But one of the brothers managed the London office in Charterhouse Street, Holborn, and Frank and Edward managed the Truro Works. Anything for sale by Atkin Brothers carries a premium. And it may be that, you know, with those links of the London market. And obviously, it goes without saying that not only was it the London market, I mean, at one point it was the American market, and then it was the whole Commonwealth market. So London was that gateway to lots and lots of other places. You know, it's just the notion of just one of the pages here, tea strainers, infusers, and stands. I suppose one of the things, if we're thinking about the Victorian period, they probably liked their tea. And you know, why do we bother with tea bags that have got bits in them that don't rot down in the compost heap, when you could have a perfectly good tea bag or tea leaf container made by the Atkin brothers. You know, and you could have a silver one for just over £1, and you could have a silver plated one for 7 and 6. The sad thing is, in modern parlance, the silver ones will be things that will just get melted down, and the silver plated ones probably will be the ones that survive. If you look, occasionally you can find these on the internet. In a way, you just need to search. If you search eBay and put Atkin Brothers in, at any point there will be maybe between 50 and 100 items. But I say, they do come, everything Atkin Brothers makes comes with a bit of premium. The one thing we have about Victorians, they love their jam. Okay? And jam for bread, jam for crumpets, whatever. And I think crudely we can think about the Victorians living on jam, pickle and sardines as being their basic diet, and their cutlery reflects that. But what you've got on the right hand side, you've got a lovely collection of the real spoons, if you like, which are on the table there. 2 things about them really. By and large, the handle bit has got a different, there's a couple with the same pattern, but generally they've got a different pattern, and all those patterns have got names. Okay, so this pattern will be called like the bamboo pattern, and this pattern is called the Venetian pattern. But the other thing is, and I don't know if anyone's ever done any work on this, the patterns on the bowls are all different as well. And I don't know if they've got a name. I don't know, would the craftspeople producing these have a bit of a choice? Or say, well, we'll make 100 of them, then we'll go make 100 of something else. Okay? And the other slightly annoying thing is, again, I got my spoons out and I tried to compare them with the spoons in the catalogue, and they don't match. So all that says is actually the company had an even bigger range than is actually in the catalogue. Okay, and the other thing that's quite nice is some of these spoons have got a ridge at the back. I initially thought that they were for caviar, but caviar doesn't go down well coming into contact with metal. It's much better to be mother of pearl, but they were for jam or for bonbons. Sometimes you got a whole course in the Victorian meals that was just bonbons. I do like these. If you said to me, what is my favourite bit of cutlery? It's these sardine tongs. And the fish have even got different expressions. And so you do get quite a bit of cutlery related to eating sardines, along with some other products like asparagus. And they're just works of art. And you could pick up a set of these on the internet for between £15 and £20. And they're just beautiful things. They just deserve to be loved and celebrated. And a few other companies made them. Yeah, just back to that notion of the patterns. So you can see all these objects have got the same pattern on the base, and I think I call it the bamboo pattern. Sometimes you did have companies that had a pattern that was just peculiar to them. Again, the last talk I gave on George Bishop, he had a pattern that he only used it, it was the only one. And I think generally this pattern is pretty distinctive to the Atkin Brothers. On the left, that's a butter spreader. We've got the sardines, and again, a couple of jam spoons. I think this end spoon might even be described as a strawberry spoon. As opposed to Allen and Darwin, this company had an absolute massive range. Left-hand side, asparagus eaters and servers. Okay, and not only that, you had the choice of at least 6 different asparagus eaters. Now, I think everybody had an asparagus set of tongs at the table, and you would have held the asparagus and you would have chomped it through the ends. There's a certain point where you get left with a bit. I don't know what you did with that, but that was particularly what they did. And obviously, the bigger servers were for picking up a group and serving them. And the bottom servers, actually, they go for a very big price. Nutcrackers. Again, you want some nutcrackers for it's Christmas. You need some nutcrackers, but you've got too much choice again. You've got the choice of a dozen different nutcrackers, which again will come in different prices and even different sizes. And nearly all these nutcrackers, you can pull them back on themselves. So you've essentially got 2 sizes on your nutcrackers. Nut picks, which you do see around, but I don't quite get the, I think I need to buy some nuts at Christmas and maybe do a bit of practicing with them. But and then of course we've got the grape scissors again at the bottom. Lot of choice, lovely objects. Yeah, I'll put this page on because a few things of interest on this page. So the one on the left, a bone holder. So this is where you could hold a leg of lamb and you could carve it. The thing next to it is called a spoon warmer. Now, I do have one of these, I haven't brought it today, but in good condition, an Atkin Brothers spoon warmer can go for £300. Well, they're for sale for £300. Whether they go for that, I don't know. But say, if you see one on the internet, so if you see one for less than £300, basically it's a bargain. I quite like that notion of a classy, silver-plated sandwich box. I don't know what you take your sandwiches to work in. It's probably a plastic box, but you could up your game, couldn't you, and get one of them? A lamp filler, a wine strainer. Put your hands up in the room if you strain your wine before you drink it. Well, but heating up your brandy. Maybe that was for a cold winter's day. I think this is maybe another strainer. So again, just that range of relatively obscure items. Yeah, lemon saws. This one intrigues me. A blowpipe. I don't think this was for small children who generally were supposed to be seen and not heard, so they wouldn't have been at the dining event, but somebody was using a blowpipe on the table for some purpose. Anybody offer any solutions? I don't have one. I need to do a bit more research on that. The thing on the left, actually, most of these things I've got. I haven't got a lemon squeezer. The placeholder's quite interesting. There's one of those at the back. And these are interesting, ice hammers. They're obviously for the table because they're quite ornate. But the notion that you're sitting at the table with a dozen other people and somebody's whacking some ice with a hammer and it's flying off in all directions is quite amusing. Whether it was in a bag or something that you hit it with, I don't actually know. But again, a number of Sheffield companies made ice hammers. Dessert knives. So we talked about the dessert knives earlier. You don't often get a table knife that's got decoration. But these, lovely decoration. They've all got their Atkins Brothers letters on. The one on the left is ivory, and it's been carved into that knobbly pattern, so you can hold on to it. Obviously, then you've got your silver-plated one. you know, we talked about the ferrule in the middle, and the one on the end is mother of pearl. And they would have come with matching forks. Generally these days, these sets get split up. Trophies. Sports trophies, and I think I put down the price of one of these sports trophies, which was pretty stunning. Yeah, so this cup here is £158. That was in that was in sort of 1914. One of the things out there in sports clubs, in regimental museums, there's an awful lot of really nice trophies that were made in Sheffield. Many of them would have been commissions, and of course, and the record of a lot of those things is actually gone. Okay, I used to think I had no interest in looking at a regimental museum, but now I've got a slight interest in thinking, you know, where did those trophies go? And lots of these regiments have actually amalgamated, and you know, well, they'd sort of they'd make whatever you want, really. You know, the BBC Sports Personality Trophy of the Year, that was made in Sheffield, and lots of, you know, the famous, I think the Masters Golf Trophy, that was also made in Sheffield. So again, there's a whole other line of inquiry about sports trophies in Sheffield. A few notable events. In 1889, Harry's home was burgled and his son George was shot, but not fatally. 1928, the Goldsmith Journal recorded on the long service with the firm. So there's 26 people with an average length of service of 47 years. Now that means some of them worked more than 47 years for the same company. Okay, so in a sense, it gives you that impression it was a company with a happy workforce. They won a major contract with the South African Railways. George VI expressed his admiration for a salver bearing the arms of the All Monarchs since 1827. Again, I tend to think, what did that look like? Where is it? Harry, the son of Harry above, was a guardian of the Assay Office in Sheffield and on the committee of the Master Silversmiths Association. And Norman was chair of the London Wholesale Jewellers Association. So they were well connected and very prominent in that quality sort of silver world. Slow decline. The firm at its peak, family run. 1925 became the Atkin Brothers, and they were capitalised to the tune of £100,000, which in today's money is actually £7.6 million. Okay, so again, gives you an idea of the scale of the enterprise. 1945, they acquired the assets of Thomas Bradbury and Sons. The family owners were dying or retiring. In 1958, the flatware dyes and patterns were acquired by C.J. Vander, who was it was a bit of an exercise of sort of trying to merge and amalgamate different Sheffield cutlery companies, which generally didn't work. The Holloware side was sold to the A.D. Brothers in Birmingham. The Truro Works was abandoned and derelict, and by the early 1990s, it was renovated and turned into student residences, and there it is. So great thing is the Truro Works is still there, and we are probably at that phase in Sheffield where if an old cutlery works comes up for grabs, it tends now to be converted rather than actually being demolished. But that's down on Matilda Street, and that was a report from 1997. Martin Hall and Co. Now, the biggest mistake it's easy to make with these is think the company's called Martin Hall, but it's not. It's Martin, Hall and Company. So in 1890, this was one of the biggest electroplated firms in the city. The business developed from John Roberts, the son-in-law of Henry Wilkinson, who was another prominent Sheffield cutler. 1831, registered a silver mark. 1836, with a dissolved. 1847, adopted Ebenezer Hall, who became a partner. Now, what's interesting here is, so this guy, John Roberts, didn't have any children. So he's basically on the lookout for somebody to take over the business. And somebody tipped him off that somewhere in the Derbyshire lead mining area, there was a lad called Ebenezer Hall, who was a really bright lad. I mean, he was at school, that was probably a good sign, but almost certainly Ebenezer Hall would have become a lead miner, like his other 11 brothers and sisters, if he hadn't been, if you like, grabbed from obscurity by John Roberts, who almost said, I'd like you to come and work with me as an apprentice. And in 1847, actually, he adopted Ebenezer Hall, who later became his partner. Now, what's interesting is in that partnership, Roberts put in £2,750, which is about £250,000 in today's money. Ebenezer Hall put in £100, which is about £8,700. it's just interesting, just the act of somebody who thought, I want to carry on the company, I want to find somebody, but essentially he adopted somebody from another family in Derbyshire to carry on the work. And the picture is obviously just a rather large cutlery set. Okay, it's a 12-piece set, which is almost as big as they get. I think I've seen 18-piece sets, but it's everything about Martin Hall. Again, it's elaborate, it's over the top. Nice piece of silverware there. The firm occupied the Shrewsbury Works. Again, not only did you have to have a logo, which you had to make sure nobody else had, you had a trademark, which nobody else had. What did you call your works? Obviously, Shrewsbury, something with long-standing. 1852, Robertson Hall merged with Martin Brothers and Naylor. 1854, they were restyled as Martin Hall and Company. They registered a silver mark from Broad Street and Pepper Alley off Fargate. So I know we know what we think about Fargate at the moment, but actually, originally that was an industrial area, and all the yards off Fargate were actually places where cutlers were working. 1851, they exhibited the Great Exhibition, as did many other Sheffield companies. In 1858, Roberts retired. He owned Abbeydale Villa, which was Abbeydale Hall, and he also built St. John the Evangelist Church, Abbeydale. This is the classic picture of a Sheffield cutlery firm. In just about every catalogue of Sheffield cutlery firms, you get a picture like this, which is a big quad, something at the front which is meant to look impressive, and almost certainly there's people going up and down outside the front with horse and cart. And of course, behind that, there were lots of little workshops. I'm sure all these pictures exaggerate the scale of the company. But again, if you were looking at something in 1870, where did you get your impression from about what places were like? Quite a progressive firm. So the report of the Children's Employment Commission noted that the Broad Street factory as having a clean and cheerful look. The workers looked tidy with private washing facilities for female staff. I don't know what the other companies did for the female staff, but it doesn't sound very good to it. In 1866, they were the first company in Sheffield to convert to limited liability, and that was to the tune of £150,000, which in today's money is 22.5 million. So they were big. Richard Martin and Ebenezer Hall were joint managing directors. And interesting, they also worked with somebody called Bernard Wake, who was the chairman of Worstenholme, whose brand was IXL, who were another prominent company. So interesting, sharing a bit of managerial experience between companies. In the first 11 years, they paid a dividend of 15%, which sounds pretty reasonable. Martin died leaving £80,000, which in today's money is 11.5 million. In 1888, the value of the shares had risen by 50%. Interesting in the catalogue, illustrated catalogues of goods specially suitable for hotels, steamships, restaurants, clubs, caterers, and public institutions. So sometimes these people were getting orders for hundreds, if not thousands, of items from a big organizer. If you got an order from a cruise liner, or the company that ran the cruise liners, it would be huge. Offices: London, Glasgow, Sydney, Melbourne, Wellington, Vancouver, Sheffield, and Birmingham. So again, the reach of these companies was very, very significant. But again, in 1914 or earlier, to get between these places would have been a little bit of a challenge. If you went on a sales mission to Australia, it wasn't about getting in a jumbo jet, was it? It was about the long ship journey. And again, the catalogue there just showing off different views. So these were the London offices, these were the Birmingham offices. So grand building, quite a lot of wealth. In a way, this set was sort of rescued. Somebody went into the Sheffield shop on Ecclesall Road with this set and basically said, can you tell me what this is worth? And the people essentially didn't have any idea, so they sent them to me. And I basically said to the chap, well, actually, they're not worth a lot of money because the handles are all split and it's ivory. So probably at the absolute tops could be worth, I don't know, 50 quid. And the guy said, oh, well, if they're not worth 1,000 quid, you can have them. So basically, they've now become part of the collection. But, they would have been thrown away, or they would have been actually, would have just been broken up. So this spoon here, really just looks like an ordinary teaspoon until you look in detail. It's actually in the shape of an acorn. So it's really, you could regard it as an autumn spoon. Maybe you only get it out in the autumn. I don't know. And clearly you didn't eat acorns, but it was just, that's probably some sort of gold on the back there. This is a spoon which is described as just a toddy spoon for whiskey, and they're the only company that made these. These spoons are just gorgeous serving spoons, and they're actually in a case by a different company, but a lot of these things, they look much better if you can keep them in a case. The problem is the cases deteriorate. But again, that was another big industry in Sheffield, not only making the wooden cases for cutlery, but making these sort of smaller cases with a bit of velvet lined in there. The company held some of the highest stock levels of solid silver goods. Several trade names again. So, our title's Martin. What letters can we add to Martin? Martinoid, Martinum, and Martin below a bird logo. Hall became very rich. He took over Abbeydale Hall, retired in 1904 after 64 years in business, died in 1911, leaving £194,000, which in today's money is 28.7 million. So again, he did rather well. The company was hit by the decline in demand for silver and silver plate in the First World War and never recovered. And really, that sentence could be applied to maybe 20 or 30 Sheffield companies, particularly the people who made fancy goods. The capital value was written down after a takeover by Gladwins, asset stripping and removal of sales and machinery, ended in the 1920s, they went bankrupt, liquidated in 1933, Shrewsbury Works taken over by Frank Cobb Building, and the building was demolished in 1920s, but we've still got Abbeydale Hall, which is there, which is the sort of legacy of that. So just like to thank Jeff Tweedale, who's provided a lot of the substantial information, who we constantly go back to, and these are his 3 books. This edition, I think, it's now got 800 pages in it. He's taken out all the illustrations, basically to make it bigger. Simon Moore, who lent us a bit of information, of course, Ken Hawley, who was the ultimate collector. So that's just 3 companies who made wonderful stuff. If you feel so motivated, you might think, now, I would like to go and look for something for one of those companies. So feel free to do so. Happy to answer any questions.